So let's get to your third question. What's the third thing
Yeah.
you want to know?
Yeah, I mean, so, a lot of artists are selling their work direct to audiences, but then a lot of times the people you're working with, potentially clients, are involved in the actual creative process itself, and that's something that we do a lot
Mhm.
when we're producing our podcasts. How do you get your clients, and in this case, but non-creative, let's call them, how do you get them to trust you in that creative process?
Good question. I have a few thoughts about this, but let me start with, do you have a specific example or a hypothetical example that you want to sort of give me?
Yeah, I mean, we produce podcasts on behalf of brands. Brands are obviously, involved in the concepting of a show, let's say, for example.
Mhm.
And, we are very much experts in this place, but we also want our
Mhm.
clients to be involved in the decision
Yeah.
making. Sometimes they don't necessarily trust our recommendations
Mhm.
on certain creative elements, and we like to improve on that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Like those are always tricky conversations. It's funny. I'll tell you a quick story. Somebody told me, I think this actually was when I was working at the Oscars, but I remember talking to somebody and they said, everybody thinks they know how to create a social media strategy because they use Facebook. And it's like, those are not the same things.
So,
And I talked to someone else who worked for a major car company and she ran social for them. And she said, literally, like, other marketing people or brand people, whatever, like they would come to her and they would go, okay, here's our commercial, here's our whatever, make it go viral. And she'd be like, that's not how this works. Right. So I completely understand. I think there's a couple things. I think the first thing is you have to speak their language, not yours. So when you're talking to a brand or a business or someone who is not necessarily quote unquote creative, it's also interesting. There's two different types, right? There's the type that knows they're not creative and is sort of intimidated by creativity. And then there's the type that maybe thinks they're more creative than they are,
or they know or
right?
they know just enough to be dangerous.
Right, exactly. But either way, I think one of the things that people run into is you need to communicate sort of on their terms and in their language and where they're at. So there doesn't feel like there's this huge disconnect of they're talking about X, Y, and Z. And I don't either believe in it or I don't know what they're talking about, or I feel stupid, or I want to sell more products and they're talking about creativity and whatever, right? I don't care about the creative process. I care about more sale, like that
Mm.
kind of thing. So I think it's speaking their language. I also think that your creative work and the way you present it to them needs to align with the outcome or goal they want. And a lot of times I think creative people, like just hypothetically, let's say like you're creating a show, you might know that. But if you're not expressing, you see a lot of times people pitch creative ideas and go, look how great this creative idea is, as opposed to pitching, this creative idea is great because it's going to get you this outcome that you want. That connection to outcome gives them something to latch onto as opposed to them just trying to assess, is that a good or bad creative idea? So I'll give you an example of this. Like again, from when I was working on the Oscars, we would have conversations about commercials and creative ads and stuff to promote the Oscars, right? And one of the things that I would always say is the Oscars don't have an awareness problem. Everybody knows when the Oscars are on. It was one of the main advantages and like lucky things about
Mm.
working there. It wasn't like a new movie or something that you're like, people have no idea what this is. You need to like introduce them to it. When Oscar Sunday comes, everybody kind of knows it's everywhere. They know the Oscars are on. So the challenge to me, commercial creative for the Oscars should not have been about raising awareness of the Oscars. What they needed to be about was, and also with the Oscars, a lot of people are going to watch it every year, no matter what. A lot of people are never going to watch it, no matter what. And then you have that big middle section where some years they might watch, some years they might not. To me, the commercials need to be all about not building awareness, but convincing those people who might watch, this is why you should watch this year. That's very different than the typical awareness of like, the Oscars are on Sunday, check it out. We're going to give awards. You know what I mean? Like everybody knows what that is. So when you're coming up with creative ideas and campaign ideas, it was not creativity for creativity's sake. And when they were being presented, it would not be, hey, look at this really cool or funny commercial we came up with. It would be, here's why this is going to convince those maybe watchers to watch.
Makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
And the presentation to people is reinforcing that. It wasn't just, hey, we came up with this commercial, isn't it cool? It was, we came up with a commercial to convince these people to watch. And this is why. The explanation of why the creative is what it is, I think can help you sort of connect with the brand or the client.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say is that, like a lot of things, some of this is semantics, right? Depending on who the client is or who the quote unquote non-creative is. And like I said, some people are just intimidated by it and don't care. Others people think they're creative geniuses, even though they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
But understanding where they're coming from and the semantics you use in which you talk about your process or your work, right? So if you're talking to a client and let's say they don't think that they're creative at all, they're intimidated by it. They may be intimidated if you say like, oh, we'd love to have you participate in the creative process. If in their mind they go, I'm not creative, like that freaks them out. But those same people might be more comfortable and welcome the opportunity if you said, hey, we want to have you participate and share your expertise. We want to have you participate in an exploratory process. We want to have you you've worked here forever. You know, even saying stuff like no one knows your brand better than you.
Right.
We want to hear about that. Even if you did the exact same process, but the semantics, the labeling of it, the how you present it to them makes them go, oh, this is for me. They now feel some ownership, invested interest in it, and feel like they can contribute. Whereas they might go, I don't have creative ideas. I'm not,
it feels like a safe space for them.
Right. That's not my thing. And the other thing, and this is, I guess, a total side note, but I'm having flashbacks to like Oscar stuff and dealing with brands. You know, the presentation of creative ideas, a lot of times, again, depending on the quote unquote client or the brand or the executive or whatever, depending on who they are, they want to have some input. So you sort of know, we would sometimes serve up an idea we knew wasn't good and we didn't want to let them kill it so they didn't kill the good one.
Right.
Right. It's like, because if we just went in there and we're like, you know, they feel pressure, self-imposed pressure to give, you ask someone to give notes or feedback, they're going to give notes and feedback.
For sure.
Right. So I think it's also being strategic about how you present stuff to them and knowing like, oh yeah, I'm going to let you feel like you weighed in and we're like, yeah, this is terrible or whatever. So we could protect the thing. We're not just going to go with the thing that's gold. And then you feel like you have to give some notes and you screw it up.
What about making them feel like the idea is theirs?
Yeah, it can, again, it depends so much of this is personality driven.
Right.
On who it is. That can definitely help. I think making them feel, I don't know that you need to make them feel that it's theirs, but I think making them feel involved in the process and that they had input. And I think making them feel heard, you know, so when you're doing, one of the things I always recommend people do with clients is, you know, if you ask them first sort of stuff about what they want, what they're talking about, and then use their words back to them in your presentation, they feel really heard, right? And again, some of this is about how you package it. Let's say you're pitching a show and you're talking to them about what they want. And maybe you ask them like, how do you think of the brand? Or what do you think the brand doesn't signify? And you're able to use some of those words in your presentation and you come back and you go, you know, let's say give me an example of a brand, just one you worked with or just a random brand.
Amazon.
Okay. So let's say that you were going to create a show for Amazon and you met with Amazon. They said, look, we're not Barnes and Noble, right? Like in every way. So you might have a pitch for a show that let's say is aimed at a certain type of book reader. And when you present it, maybe part of your presentation is the show for people who wouldn't be caught dead in Barnes and Noble.
Right. So you're mirroring back what they've.
You're just mirroring back some of their own language, and that person goes, "Oh, they get me." Like this, they might not even realize that they basically served up the language to you.
For sure.
But I think that's really helpful, and I think it seems obvious, but I think a lot of people don't do it. Right? They fall in love with their own creative thing, and they just sort of ignore those specific phrases that other people used.
Yeah. No, it's great advice.
Cool.